Hey guys, today I'm doing a motherboard replacement on an HP Spectre laptop. This is a laptop that got something spilled on it, and so it wasn't powering on with the power jack anymore. It was actually working on battery, but would not power on with the power cord plugged in. And the first step for this one is to remove the bottom panel here. There's some screws that are located on each of the corners and on the sides, and there's actually some screws underneath the top rubber stoppers there that need to be removed too. And it's kind of tricky. You have to get a small flathead under there or a pry tool or something like that to get those off. So, but they do need to come off. And the bottom ones, the bottom rubber stoppers don't come off, just the top, kind of right by where my hand is right now. And you'll see in a second. So I take my small flathead and just pry up on these little rubber pieces. And they have some sticky adhesive on the bottom, so they will go back on. And then you want to remove the screws underneath each of those. And then I'm just going to use a guitar pick as a pry tool here. Just going to remove this bottom panel. There's some clips on the top, so it kind of lifts up in the direction you can see in the video. You want to lift up from the back there. And then that'll unhook. And so the first thing here you want to do with pretty much any laptop that you take apart is disconnect and remove the battery. You always want to have no power to the laptop when you're taking it apart. Sometimes you can accidentally press the power button, or it could be in standby mode or something, so make sure you unplug that battery first. And then I just remove this sticky protective piece here. I'm not sure what that's for exactly. And so here I'm just going to remove the fan screws. And then I'm just detaching the fan cables. You gotta be really careful with these when you pry them up. They don't have a clip or anything, they just kind of pry up from the bottom and go straight up. And now I'm going to remove the heatsink screws here. Now I can just remove this whole heatsink fan assembly here. And here I'm just going to detach the speaker on one side. I'm just using my fingernail on one side of it and a small flathead on the other to try to evenly distribute pressure when I'm removing it. And there I just remove the CMOS battery, and now I'm going to detach the touchpad cables, the backlight cables, power button, keyboard, I/O board, all that kind of stuff. All those little cables need to come detached so we can remove the motherboard. And most of these are just a flip up, flip down, lock, unlock style connection. So the little tab doesn't actually get removed, it just flips up and stays on. And we want to be really careful with those. It's a common thing I see people break. But they just flip up and flip back down to lock. And there I'm going to detach the speaker on that side. And as you can see there, I took that little flathead and just flipped that lock up. Or you can use your fingernail if you have whatever works. And there I removed the I/O cable. And now I'm going to remove the SSD drive. It's just a single screw holding it in, and then you want to take it out at a slight angle. And here I'm going to detach the video cable. And here I'm going to detach the Wi-Fi leads and the webcam. And I'm just removing the Wi-Fi card here because it's actually going to have to come off to replace the motherboard and put the Wi-Fi card on the new motherboard. And here I'm going to remove the RAM cover, and you can take out both of the RAMs. You just pull on those side little spring connectors there, and that'll have the RAM will come right out. And so now I'm ready to remove the motherboard screws. And now everything's been detached and all the screws are removed. The motherboard will come out nicely. So here's the new motherboard we'll be installing. And what I'm doing here is adding some Arctic Silver 5 to the GPU and the CPU. You want to put kind of a small amount on there, maybe like half a BB sized drop. And then I like the Arctic Silver 5, it comes with a little plastic applicator that I can just take right here and I can flatten that out. And the key is to cover the whole die of the CPU or the GPU and just try to make it so there's no air bubbles on there. You just want it nice and flat and evenly distributed over the die. And it's much better than the factory job. It's pretty amazing to me that HP will just take a big glob and just drop it on there and it gets all over the circuit board, and it's not conductive for electronics, but still I like to do things correctly, and the correct way to do this is to just put it on the CPU and get it evenly distributed with as many or as little rather air bubbles as possible. Just a nice even coat. And this is key for good cooling of the computer. This is a 940M GPU chip and then a i7, so it runs really hot, and if you have good thermal paste you can really help reduce the heat in these things. And as everybody knows, heat is a big laptop killer, so doing a good job on your thermal paste is critical for the heating. And I also have another separate tutorial on how to do it using this motherboard as an example, so I'll put a link in the description for that, and it'll be on my channel as well. And now that that's done, I can start hooking everything back up here. So everything obviously that was unhooked is going to have to be hooked back up. The speaker, touchpad, wireless leads, webcam, LCD cable, all that stuff's going to have to be reattached now. And what I'm doing here is I just want to make sure that it's nice and lined up properly and even and sitting in there where it's supposed to. You don't want to have any kind of angle or gaps when you try to go screw it in. It needs to fit on there perfectly flush and flat like the way it came out. And each one of those ribbon cables, just make sure it's nice and even in there before you lock it down. If it's not seated properly, you can get some funky things happening where your touchpad wouldn't work or something like that if it's not seated properly in there. And just be careful when you're putting, like I'm doing here, the speaker cable back in. You want to make sure you line it up nicely. You don't want to put anything in at an angle, just nice and straight. And these wireless leads are kind of tricky. It's just a little circle that goes over another circle for the wireless card for the input. So you just want to make sure you don't force anything in here. It should snap in nice and easy. And the wireless cards are kind of like the SSD cards where they just go in at a slight angle. And once again, you don't want to force anything in. It should go in nice and smooth. And make sure it's pushed all the way back inside there. And those screw holes will line up too, so you'll know when it's in properly. Here I'm just lining up each one of those little leads over the hole. Or not really a hole, a little circle. And they just snap down. And the RAM goes in at a slight angle too, just like the SD card and the wireless card, and then they snap down with those little pins on each side. And the SD card goes in at kind of like a 15-20% angle, and then you just push it in just like the Wi-Fi card. And that I/O cable is labeled one side I/O, one side motherboard, so it's kind of hard to screw that up putting it back in. And then next step, I'm going to put in the fans and heatsink again. You can just push down on those fan connectors to make sure you line them up properly, and they just push right in. Now I'm just routing that speaker cable along the fan, plugging that thing back in. And here I'm just going to reinstall the RAM cover. You just want to line it up properly. It's got some little tabs you can push it down into. And here I'm just going to put this thing back. I like to always put things back where I found them. I'm not sure what this is doing exactly, but usually they have some of these pieces of tape that are covering the actual circuit board, and which would provide some protection from like a piece of metal from the bottom case or something. But and then now that all the cables are back in place, I can put the battery back in and plug it in. And now I can just put the bottom panel back on there. And I'm just making sure that I snap around all the different sides there to make sure it's nice and snug. And this one's kind of tricky, so you have to make sure you lined everything up properly and make sure there's no gaps and all the screw holes line up. And the last step is just to put the remaining bottom screws back in the computer. And once you get all the screws in here, this thing's going to be ready to power up. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have any questions, just leave a comment below. I appreciate your time.